So if I were to ask you, Jimmy, what would you say, or what would you think about your core values, or what would they be if somebody asked you that?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. The first thing I would definitely mention is that you said you've got to get kind of into my head, and that's the opposite of what my wife would say. She would say, "Don't go there." She would say that's a minefield. But no, yeah, no, it's an interesting one. So I think really, in order to begin to unpack that, because it's, of course, you asked this question to many very key individuals, but I think in order to unpack that, I think I have to sort of go back to why I wanted to do what I did, right? And this is my role in the wine industry and the drinks industry at large. But really, it comes down to a key word, which is communication. That was the thing that I really thought that was not done so well, especially when I first started in the wine industry, which is now going back sort of 25, 26 years. And there was this big disconnect, this big disparity between all of the knowledge out there and the general population. And for me, there needed to be some sort of connecting point. Of course, we have major institutions like WSET that was born in the 1960s, but there still seemed to be, perhaps on the offset, sort of like an elitist side of view of things. Wine in the UK, for instance, was certainly only drunk by individuals that potentially could afford it. It's a luxury, certainly in the old days. But of course, that started to change, and that started to change really at the end of the last millennia. And we start to see people enjoying it much more frequently, but not really having the knowledge behind it. And that's where I started to see a big disconnect. And that goes back to my family, who I come from a background which my parents were teetotal, not for any religious reasoning, but really for reasoning that they just did not drink alcohol. Right? It was a rarity in my household. Only when esteemed guests would come round and colleagues of my parents would something be ushered in from the dark depths of the garage or wherever it may be. And I kind of thought, well, there's a reason why my parents are not too enamored by, say, wine. And I think it's because it's something that really makes them intimidated and anxious, and they were not sure how to approach it. And they immediately dispelled it as something they wouldn't enjoy because of that. There's too much, maybe they would use words like snobbery or elitism around it, etc. So I started working in the wine industry and as a retail outlet manager to begin with, and then moved.
Was that a conscious move to go into wine retail, or did you sort of just fall into it? So how did that come about?
Well, no, I mean, really, to be honest, it's the age-old classic child reaction to parents. It's the opposite to what my parents wanted to do. So I think I was rebelling, as all teenagers I think do have in their arsenal. So I would, and I didn't have the ability to raid a wine cellar like many teenagers. So I decided to actually just go into it as a wine job. But I was working in a restaurant in my local small sleepy town up in sort of east of England, and I got poached by the local wine shop when they came in for their Christmas meal, because I was, in their words, communicating wine very well. And I was 18 years old and talking about what I'd been told about these wines. They're all Italian, so it was Brunello, it was Chianti, it was Barolo, etc. And I was talking about them, and they were really fascinated by it. And that's the first time I got told that I could communicate this. And this is coming from somebody, and this may be hard for you to believe, Thomas, and many of your listeners who have heard of Wine with Jimmy, but when I was 18, I would never talk in front of people. I had no ability really to stand up in front of people. I could have one-on-ones, but I really did not have that ability to communicate a subject or a topic. So then this little snippet of inspiration comes along, and I didn't know that the seed was being planted, but someone says, you're really good at communicating this. And then I start to take that upon myself at the wine shop that I work in. I'm actually playing truant as well a lot. I'm not at school to work to this wine shop. It's another long
really?
story, but I had a bit of a difficult
Jimmy,
time.
I think we're uncovering a lot of layers here. This is very
Yeah, right. Yeah, I found all my answers at the bottom of a bottle, moderately.
A lot of people have said that as well.
Yeah, so I basically was working in the wine shop. I had this real inspiration behind me, but I was constantly getting pegged back by careers advisors at school, which of course they would say, I mean, this is what are we talking? This is the 1990s, right? The classic ethos of careers advisors: you must be a solicitor, you must be a lawyer, you must be an accountant, and there's a very narrow direction, certainly from the school that I was going to, in terms of really where you should be. You should be fed into London City, where you're going to earn six-figure sums, but of course work 20-hour days or whatever it may be. And I just didn't want to do that. And my rebellious nature at that time would be to leave school, to work in a wine shop, to talk about wine. And that's exactly where it all started. I did my level 2 and 3 at the age of 18. I got my result of my level 3 on my 19th birthday.
Wow.
And that's it. That's where, I mean, but bearing in mind, I know you've just done the level 3, Thomas.
Well, Jimmy, just to give you perspective, I just finished level 3 at the age of 52.
To be honest, it's a lot harder today than it was when I took it. So I think if I took it now, it might take me a couple of decades. But yeah, I really started to get into it. And then the other thing that was happening for me was at school, I was starting to identify the most interesting topics for me. So my parents very much wanted me to be a mechanical engineer, which I did not want to be, but that required mathematics and physics, and I was flunking those. I was so bad at both of those. But then I was doing geography, which I was flying at, and I was specializing in physical geography. So geology was a big sort of focus there. So that's where it all began, because the disciplines, as you know, Thomas, the disciplines within wine are multiple. You can find your biology in wine, your chemistry, your politics, your social side of things, your geology, your geography, cultural, your history. You can find every discipline within wine. So luckily I am hugely interested in all of it. With the scientific part of my brain not being engaged till later life, I sort of just fell into the geography, the geology, the history, the politics, and I was loving it. And now I'm a winemaker as well. I've tried to engage my other part of my lobes to sort of engage science, and I'm really happy that I've gone down that route, sort of to make sure that I understand the whole discipline of all the disciplines rather within wine. So that was the early stages, and that's pretty much where it began for me. I continued to communicate wine, but it was that stage where I started to change from wine retail into wine education, because the company that hired me, this wine shop company, had 1,600 stores in the UK. So we call them off licenses. You guys, of course, call them liquor stores. So it's a little bit like a Total Wine sort of model, but much smaller, in terms of these small kind of neighborhood shops, not big warehouses like you find in the States. And they said, why don't you start teaching WSET for our organization? And I went in. I was one tutor of many, and I was driven to change the process. So the education side of that business, I can see why the company was struggling, because there was very little focus or direction. So at the age of 20, I would have been 24, I think, I plucked up the courage. Now with this kind of maybe a little bit of swagger behind me, I'd suddenly found my calling card in life. And I went to the head office of this organization with a meeting with the MD, and the CEO, and I put a proposal out there how to rechange everything within their business for education, to streamline it, to get better results, to spend less money, to make more happy employees. And they took that up straight away, and I became the head of education for that company at the ages of 24, 25, until that company went bust. Unfortunately, in the end, it was already on a slippery slope to the abyss. And that's when I had to change direction again, and that's when I opened up my first wine school in 2008 it would have been.
May I ask that there was probably a lot of other people that may have recognized that deficiency or that gap in terms of the education quality that the organization was receiving. What was it that drove you to actually say, you know what, I'm going to put a proposal together and I'm going to go to the, the managing director or the CEO and pitch this? What was it? Because especially at that age, it's not very typical for a lot of people in their early 20s to do
Yeah,
that. What
no,
was it?
it's a really great question, Thomas. For me, it was that I would, in order to understand the role that I was now finding myself in when I first became an educator for that company, I wanted to understand, of course, what I wanted to learn. I wanted to gain from the experience of others. So I would sit in other people's classes, everything I could do to learn about the process, because it was newer for me, and structuring a lesson and dealing with different types of people and all these kind of things. And I was just willing, you know what you're like when you're young. You're like a sponge, and you're absorbing everything. And that's exactly how I found it. But I found that sitting in these classes, there was little direction that was coming from the business as a whole to the tutors. The tutors they were honestly doing their best to deliver WSET, and WSET was really changing at that time as well. So it was going in a more difficult direction. There's much more content, and they were trying to deal with these changes, trying to implement them, and really honestly struggling. And I saw that, and then I saw the disconnect between those educators and the students. And that's what I sort of looked at, and I went, well, there's no point in this process unless we get this process right. If we can communicate the wonderful world of wine at a good level to these students, and then the implementations that we then went through meant that there was such good high pass rates. People were loving the course. The feedback was exceptionally high. Sadly, it was short-lived, but that was the nature of the business that I was working in, that it did not survive those the sort of credit crunch times. But it was that disconnect that I saw, and there's just a wealth of that information. And I just wanted to connect the dots, and I wanted people to enjoy that connection. And it kind of pained me just to see that wasn't happening.
It's funny, I know most people will be listening to this. They don't see the audio, but I can see it in your eyes when you light up a little bit when you talk about understanding that connection. So
yeah,
it's very interesting to see that. And I almost get the sense that there's a lot of curiosity that comes with you as well. And it almost feels like that curiosity is sort of pushing you in areas. And what I'm curious about is the next step that you just talked about. Usually most people would be like, okay, let me find another job at another wine shop. But it sounds like you didn't do that.
No, it was, I suppose there was a little bit of serendipity in the next step, because the business was closing down, closing 1,600 stores across the UK. It was a sad time, an institution, and the company name was Thresher Group, and it had been in existence since 1889 or something like that. So it was an old school wine merchant trying to evolve with the times, but of course, after 120 years or so, it had come into difficulties. And there's a slight sort of dark age that I entered, which was the transitional period of leaving that job and starting the wine school, because they were very kind to me. They loved what I'd done for the business, and I was a young guy, right? And of course, I aired my concerns. I was like, well, what am I going to do now? I have to go out and get a job, etc. So they let me babysit a number of stores to to close them down, which is why I call it the dark age, because it's not the nicest of processes. You know, there's no stock coming in. You're just palming off stock very cheaply. You're having the conversations continually about, you know, about the closure of a store, which is very sad. But in that time, I decided, well, I'm using this time because I'd be twiddling my thumbs otherwise, and I'd use that time to come up with a strategy with what I wanted to do in my life. And I wanted to continue communication of wine. I wasn't sure how to do that, so I started to talk to a lot of people, see if there were any roles in other businesses around, other off-license liquor store chains, etc. And it suddenly, I saw an advert for somebody who was looking to expand their franchise network of schools, wine schools. And it was the first time they were doing it, but I needed to raise capital in order to do that. So I put some feelers out there, but it looked like it would be very difficult. You know, I come from a working class background, so I had very little money to my name. So I needed to raise some money in order to do this next step. And I was out having beers with a very good friend of mine, and he's still one of my best friends, now lives in California, actually. And he's a very close friend, comes and helps every harvest here at the winery, for example. And we're having beers, and I said to him, I said, would you put me in contact with one of your friends who's a venture capitalist? And would you, you know, be able to give me that connection? And he went, no. And I was like, oh. He goes, why don't you ask me? And I was like, okay. And then there was like that awkward 10-second silence. And I went, could I borrow some capital off you?
Yeah, that's always a weird conversation with a good friend, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And he said, sure, Jimmy, I see the drive and the ambition in you, and I'm more than happy to put the money behind you. And he became my only financier at that point, and it was enough to completely open the wine school, and that's where it all started. And he said after a year, he said, look, don't worry about the money. It's not about that. And then coming from the upbringing that I came up from with my father and mother, I was like, not having any of that whatsoever. So within 6 months after that, I paid him back all the money. And, you know, it was just that lovely moment where I could call upon a friend, and the values between a friendship like that, you know, and there was no contract, there was no writing anything down, no expectations. And that's really where that moment in time started for me to be.
What do you mean by the values between friends? When you say that, what did you mean by that?
Well, I mean, as in like the respect that you have for one another. I mean, I knew he would always had a bit of finance behind him, but you know, I'd never at that point in my life asked anybody for money, you know, because that's just not the way I was brought up. But I kind of, in that 10-second gap I was telling you about, I don't know, maybe my life flashed before my eyes, and I was able to think about, you know, should I do this for the first time? Shall I ask? And then respecting that relationship between me and him, I kind of decided there and then that no matter how this went, it would not impact our relationship. And that's why that was able to be the catalyst for starting that journey. And do you know what? It's absolutely imperative, you know, in terms of where I got to today, that moment, almost like a butterfly effect, I suppose, where it kind of, you know, completely all happened at that moment.
Were you coming into your own as a communicator at that point? Well, actually, let me. One thing I was curious about is when you were winding down the other business, when you're doing that, do you think that there were certain skills that you sort of developed, hindsight, that, you know, because it always seems like when we look at our journey, you know, backwards, there's always things that we didn't realize that we needed, that we got at a certain point in time. Do you feel that aspect sort of gave you different skills in terms of how you're progressing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, if you think about, you're absolutely right. You can apply what you've just mentioned to everything, and you can apply it to your relationships in life. Whoever you have been with, you gain an idea of who you want to be with in the end, right? And you go on that journey. And for me, I suppose, thinking about the structure of that business that I was working, I could see a lot of holes in that business, and a lot of ways where good people were leaving, money was being mismanaged, and I think it gave me a lot of principles to understand business on a small scale to begin with, but I was very frugal and very very sort of dedicated to make sure that the little business that I was growing into a large business, you know, within 10 years, really was well cared for. So much so that, in fact, during that journey, it became very difficult. And I think this is a story that I think you would have heard many times, but it became very difficult for me to disconnect from any part of the business because I was in control of everything. And that kind of control is not anything about an ego trip or it's just loving that control. It's about the fact that you can have an understanding of everything that's happening in your business at any one time. But for me, that eventually did end. And there was a story behind that as well, where I was able to sort of develop the business. Did you want to go into
Oh
that
yeah,
story?
yeah. No, hey, listen, don't let me hold you back. This is good stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I definitely grew West London Wine School through its early years very quickly. We grew from a one room entity to a 2-room entity. So we're able to do lots more classes, and we were running classes continually, you know, 2 a night, Monday to Friday, Saturday days, Sunday days. The school was very, very busy, and it still is today. And it grew and grew, and I started taking on new tutors, and we're doing new topics. We're sinking our teeth into new qualifications. It was just fantastic. But I was still running everything, administration. I was running the phone lines. I was doing most of the teaching. I was doing the wine buying. I was doing the negotiating. I was going on wine trips to do the research. And this was when I was before a family, you know, before children. So I was working
BC,
myself.
we call it the old BC, before children. So yeah,
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly. Yes, the old BC indeed. Yeah, so I just was able to dedicate my soul to it. But I was on my first ever sort of funded trip. So to South Africa, this was, where Wines of South
Oh, wow.
Africa had paid for me to be there. And the schedule was action-packed. It's phenomenal, wonderful. But my realization happened consistently between the hours and 6 and 9 in the morning in South Africa. It's only a 2 or 3 hour difference to the UK, but I would have to get up early every morning just to do work, check, you know, clear the emails, respond to any phone conversations, you know, order examination papers, order exam books, you know, the list goes on. Then
Right.
I would try get into my day in South Africa, visiting 4 or 5 producers, long lunches, long dinners. Then I'll come back and do the same again. And I realized through day 4 or 5 of that, and I said, this is just not sustainable. I need to change my mentality, because it's a business which is really growing, and I need to accept other great people into my business to do roles. And that kind of change in my mentality has been a brilliant way that has helped West London Wine School go to its next level. Because I think there really is a ceiling that you can get to for growing a business like mine. It might be different with, you know, certain tech companies and so on, but with a wine school, which is a bricks and mortar school with, you know, in-person classes, it just wasn't sustainable. But now the school hires 12 different tutors. We've got administrative team, marketing. You know, we have a big contingent of great people that are in the same ethos and kind of idea about the school. So, but that was that moment in time in South Africa.
That must have been pretty jarring and scary, because I think at that point, when you have to relinquish some control in that regard, that tends to be the tripping point for a lot of entrepreneurs. Right. So it's that point where, you know, you sort of say, where am I going with this? Can you stay a little small, or, you know, what's happening? The interesting word you mentioned there, I'm curious if we can discuss, is ethos. So how would you articulate that in that phase of what was happening?
Yeah. For me, the business, so West London Wine School, I had a very key idea about the school, because the school was built on a principle of delivering real high quality wine education for everybody. Okay, so that this is for everybody that can wants to rather learn about wine, they'll have the option. So we would do introductory courses which are affordable, and it will go all the way up to professional courses, which of course are much more expensive and aimed more at tradespeople, but not necessarily. And that's really where the core principles would come in, that I wanted people to come through the school in their droves to enjoy wine and connect with those people. And really, that really jumps back to my upbringing, remembering that I was not brought up into wine. I was not, I didn't have a cellar to raid, and I wasn't drinking Cru Classé Bordeaux, at the age of 15. For me, it was, my first real significant consumption of wine was in the wine shop, and then going off to university. And I understood that really people, there's a lot of people out there like me. Not everybody has had maybe you can use whatever word, but maybe a fortunate introduction to wine. But I don't see it like that so much, because for me, I think I respect the product so much that, I've built, of course, multiple careers out of it, but being able to connect with everybody. And you mentioned, Thomas, earlier when we were in the green room just chatting before, just about, you're across the big pond, and, people are openly talking about Wine with Jimmy, and we know that Wine with Jimmy's biggest market is the United States. Now, I'm married to an American.
Is it really?
Yeah, by a country mile. Yeah, so the US is really big for us, and I married an American from Connecticut, so we're often in New England. So it's I teach in Boston, and it's
really.
I teach at the Commonwealth Wine School with Jessica there, and it's really great there. And I'll be actually at the Boston Wine Expo in April, in a couple of months' time. Sorry if you don't want timestamps on this, but it's for me, it's that kind of connection, and that's where I've then gone and developed. Right, so in the UK, I've tried to make the accessibility of wine for everybody who wants to access it, and they can, right? And then in later stage with Wine with Jimmy, which I'm sure you'll get into a little bit more, it's been about making that accessible for a global audience, and being able to connect with, yes, the English speaking world, which is the natural progression, but then also the non-English speaking world. And I teach in Georgia, for example, and that has been an absolute shift in my ability to communicate, how I have adapted myself in order to connect to people around the world, not just the UK.
Wow, that is amazing. I mean, I'm just jotting down some things as you're talking. Accessibility, respect, connection. I see these as things that are really driving you, and I don't know if I'm misinterpreting that, but and again, you light up when you talk about these things.
Yeah.
So I think that to me is more inspiring, because like you, working class family. So my parents were both born in Poland, and and I came over here. So I don't have a lot of that sort of posh background either. So wine does tend to be more of that. I don't want to say snobby, but that tends to be the word that people think of the most. And I love the product. So I came to this very, very late in life because of my curiosity around this. And I'm wondering, the other thing you talked about was almost like that global reach. So how did that come about? And my assumption is that Wine with Jimmy on YouTube and things of that nature, was that a result of things that had happened because of some of the pandemic issues, and then maybe pivoting strategically for the school that you had established? So how did that come about? Because that's, I mean, what you've done there is pretty wild. And I'm just wondering, what was that pivot that brought you there?
Yeah, so as you know, the West was doing very well, and in fact, West London Wine School's best year was 2019. So it had grown in the space of 11, 12 years. It grown to be the largest independent wine school in the United Kingdom, multi-award winning, all those sort of things. So very proud of that school. We've got, as I mentioned, a really great team that helps create content, to administer, to deliver, to communicate. And that was growing wonderfully well. And everything was just in a fantastic place. And of course, January of 2020, in fact, the West London Wine School posts its best ever month of all time. And of course, we're planning off the back of that, because there's this wonderful, on all the positive charts that you have up in any kind of business room, you've got that lovely spike going up, and we're planning for that. Right. And planning means we're, booking in people, we're buying products, and we're putting money into lots of parts of the business. And then suddenly, of course, this complete cliff edge happens, as we all know, in March of 2020. I mean, my first child is born in January 2020 as well. So there's a kind of a very sort of personal change in my life as well. Of course, we're all very much prepared for, but nobody can prepare for, of course, what happened 2 months after that in March, which on one side of the coin was great, because I did get to spend more time with my son and my wife, which is great. But of course, we had to, as in the word you used, which of course I think was the most popular word of 2020, which was pivot. We had to pivot everything, right? So we had to pivot the wine school to online courses, which we had never done before. But we were one of the first in the UK, and one of our real great success stories of that is the fact it's still going today. So we're the only one in the UK left still doing online education, where we send out tasting kits, and we continue to do so successfully as well. So it's really great. So that happened, but that was a huge undertaking. We also have a wine bar that we had to kind of change into a wine shop during this time. And luckily, I don't have many positives to say about the Conservative government, certainly in the last 10, 15 years, but they did list wine shops as essential services. So we were able to keep that going, which was quite nice. But then, yes, we, and I say we, because my wife, who has been by my side, of course, throughout all of this, we got married in the US, as I mentioned. She's from Connecticut.
How did you guys meet?
We met in London. She moved across here to LSE to study at LSE, and then London School of Economics, and then stayed on with a company here from Connecticut, Greenwich Associates, but they had an office in London, and they paid for a visa, and she stayed out here. So then I eventually met her, and then the rest is history, as they say.
As they say,
But she's the beauty and the brains behind my ambition and my drive and all those kind of things. She's, the old phrase, behind every great man, there's a greater woman.
Yes.
And
we could stop the podcast right now. Because it's
that's it. You found it. You found that nugget. Yeah. And that's it. And that's where you cut, and it's interviewing Beth at that point, right? So she of course is helping me through this, because I mentioned the little segue into why I talked about her is because I used we, in terms of, we were having to react as a family and with multiple businesses. She had left her job in the city and started working on the administrative and strategic side of West London Wine School. Then we opened the wine bar together. We opened a second wine school, and so on and so on. But she was the one who really said, look, there are people out there that want to be connected to you, Jimmy, but at the minute we're only connected to the UK. So I said, okay, well, let's do some stuff on social media, which is kind of taken off by then. Of course, this is 2020. It's very much taken off. And I started putting some, and I was thinking about it. I was like, well, Instagram at that time, was just all about short videos, and that's not me. I want to connect a real interesting topic in a very detailed way. So we did YouTube, and YouTube at that point, some people were seeing it as a little bit old school, we'd moved on to, things like Instagram and TikTok and blah, blah, blah. But I did YouTube because there's a lot more volume of content you can put there, of time of content. And we put some out there, and amazingly, loads of great feedback, and American specifically, really, really lots of real great feedback in there. And this was the impetus really for me to sort of sit there with Beth patting me on the back, I suppose, as well, saying, well, let's do this. Let's put some more content out there. And I started creating those kind of understanding videos, I called them at that point, understanding Bordeaux, understanding Burgundy, and then was doing the walkthroughs of the questions, and then started to link it to WSET. And people kept mentioning to me that you know, we want more of this and we'll pay you for it, you know, and that's where the business model, that's where the business model started. I was like, you know, really? And that's where the business model was created. And I tell you, a really interesting moment for me was during all of that, during COVID. The pandemic, of course, was difficult, fascinating, interesting. There are many words you can link to it. I got to spend a lot of time with my firstborn. I got to walk the dogs 2 times a day. I'm not sure if it was fully legal at that point, but you know what it was like. It was crazy. But I was doing lots, and I was learning French. I was learning Spanish on my dog walks. You know, I'd go out for 2-hour dog walks at a time, and you know, whilst working, looking after a baby is much easier to look after than 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds. So I look back fondly on those baby days. It's just the sleep, right? But I got to do these walks, and I was learning French and Spanish with this wonderful platform. The name escapes me now.
Like Rosetta Stone or something like that?
No, it's called Coffee Break French, I think, but it was podcast format. So I was listening to this, and you can pause at any time and practice. And I would do that 2 hours a day, maybe even more. And then it got to the end of me learning this. I did like 3 seasons with them, which must have been like 40 hours of content, maybe more. And I got to the end of this season. They said, well, everything now is a paywall from now on. So you'd have to pay to sign up. And immediately, without even one thought process, I was like, click, yes, 1 click, paid, done. Because I found the content really detailed, really well communicated, and then very, very fascinating to learn through. And that gave me real great inspiration to build the Wine with Jimmy model, where of course we put a lot of free content out there, which is our only way of marketing. We do not do advertising. We don't even do a newsletter. We have only those free videos that go out. And if people value them to the level that we hope, and of course that has happened, then they will sign up. And of course, Thomas, you're a case in point with that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the lack of quote unquote marketing is almost in itself a brilliant strategy, because I found it naturally through the platform, but it was not just that. It was the corroboration from others that said, this is like really great content. And then when I got into the platform, I'm almost doing a commercial here for you, but the level of detail in the content is, so I just told people, if you're not, you got to sign up for that. You got to do this. So I think your strategy in that regard was brilliant, because you see the videos and you get a great content, but I also found value from others, right? Because then it's like, you know, did you hear Jimmy's this video? Did you see this video? Did you see these flashcards? Did you understand, you know, the essays that he gives you as part of the platform? So there's a tremendous amount of value that you provide, pardon the pun, value that you provide there for you know, a very reasonable price from that perspective. But what I'm curious is as the business was growing and you're moving in these different areas, how did you ensure that the ethos of those that you're working with was consistent with your ideals?
Within the wine school, you mean, or
all your businesses?
Across all of it. It's difficult because, as you know, inevitably with any small business which grows, specifically quite quickly, you have to manage that. And that's something we've now learned quite well. We'd like to think anyway, because you can definitely disconnect from people and process if you don't think about it, because your mind is elsewhere. And I've got to say, we didn't get everything right, because I've got a new family that's being born. Of course, we've got the pandemic that's going on. in those first couple of years. We also had an absolutely horrific event. We had a fire that ripped through our wine school in 2021. So
Oh,
we
wow.
just got over COVID. I think we just got out of maybe the second wave. I can't remember exactly. But then we had to close down the school for a bit. We then had to do our classes elsewhere. So we had all of this real difficulty around us, with kind of spiraling out of control costs because of COVID, for example, the fire that happened. Then there's the personal reasons like family. So of course there are difficulties that can happen. And I've got to say that something like our wine bar, that we brought a manager in for that who was fantastic, and he still is a really important person in my life today. We kind of sat him down saying, you need to be self-sufficient. And I think, you need to operate this almost as your own business. And we gave incentives, of course, with that, because we had no time to work with that business during that kind of difficult era. And he did a phenomenal job, but ultimately that kind of really sort of grinded him down. And he went through a few bits of personal instance as well. And I suppose I don't know if it's a word of regret, because it was such a challenging time for everybody, but I certainly do have slight concerns about, could I have done things differently? Could I offered more support if we had support available? So there's not everything that's done perfect, but certainly with our school, we all clubbed in together to work through that difficult time. Some people really shone at that time as well, and we decided to try and reward them as much as possible, in terms of, there wasn't much financing available during those dark, difficult times.
Yeah, no
But
kidding.
we would make sure that their education was always, any step they wanted to go in, we would always make sure there was education there for them, and also giving them opportunities to work within the newer parts of our businesses. The two newest parts of our businesses are the one we just talked about, which is Wine with Jimmy. So moving some people across to there to help with some of the content creation, which actually didn't work so much in the end. I'll get to why that is in a second. But the second area was the winery, which started in 2022. And we've give a lot of opportunity. And in fact, our whole team that works at the winery, it's a small winery, but during times like bottling, certainly times of harvest, the team is pretty much, I'd say 75% of it is wine school teachers, administrative people, marketing, etc. So there's always what I like to call a progression, not only for my team, they've always got the option for progression that we try to sort of coax them into as well, if they need a bit of a push, but also the progression for our students. I want basically for both of those two sets, which are two absolutely important parts of your business, I want the student to have a progression. I want them to come to us and stay with us from that first class when they get bitten by the wine bug, and then I want them to continue that journey with me for hopefully forever, but for many years. Yeah, not just come to us for one course, move on to another institution. I want them to come through that. And it's the same with my tutors. And do you know what? We haven't actually took on a new tutor for about 2 years now. Most of them have been there for a long time, at least sort of, 5 years, I'd say would be about the average. And they have a progression, right? They have a progression to keep learning their education. And one big change I've done in the last 2 years, maybe 3 years now, is that all of these invites I get to go on wine trips, to learn about new wine regions, to be included in the new releases of certain wines and go to chateaus and whatever it may be. I would always be the front runner. Maybe a couple of other people will do stuff, but now that's being spread out a lot more. My team is given a lot more responsibility in terms of fostering those relationships with the places they are visiting, learning from those areas, bringing that back into the school, so they belong more to the school. They love to be a part of it because they are creating maybe a new part of education for us. And one of the great examples we have recently is a new course that we launched called Grandes Pagos de España, which is the great estates of Spain. And I've had one of my team members, wonderful lady called Fran, who's joined me on that, to go on the trips, create the content, build the courses, to make sure that it connects well with the students, and then deliver it. And just to see her progression from, let's call it, moment zero to the real delivery, and then the feedback that we get from students has been magical. And that's really what I've looked into. My second in command at the wine school went off to California in January. It's a trip that I would normally do, but he is just obsessed with all things California now, and is fostering relationships and really doing well, working with the educational body, Wines of California.
You know what it sounds like? It sounds like a second wave of what happened to you in that South Africa trip in your early on, right? Where you had that moment of clarity that you had to click. It's like, oh, wait a minute, I need to shift.
Yeah.
This sounds like another shift.
You're exactly right. And in the past, I definitely would be a little bit more focused on maybe one or two individuals, just because I think that they are the go-to for everything for me within my businesses, but it doesn't work like that. And I'm to Provine coming up in March. I'm taking another one of our people who is actually in events. She's got brilliant planning behind her. So we're strategically planning all of our meetings, and it's just to see these people get their teeth sunk into something is just been great. But you're exactly right, that kind of moment of clarity, maybe I should have more of them more frequently. Maybe, but when they
it honestly, it sounds like you're evolving into a different space also, and that's just an observation from our discussion, and we could talk a little bit more about that, because I'm curious to get your thoughts. But one thing I'm interested in is, if we were to poll everybody that works with you in all of your organizations, what would they say the ethos is, or how would they describe the guiding lights of what your business is?
I think it'd be really interesting to do that. I think there'll be a lot of positivity, a lot of interest. They would definitely, I'd love them to come at it with a bit of honesty, because they would almost definitely say that I am overtly ambitious and too hard working.
I don't get that from you, Jimmy.
Yeah, so maybe I should put my brakes on a little bit more, because I am not able to probably have the connections with my staff in a personal one-to-one as much as I'd like to, or even in an informal setting. We only really gather as teams a few times a year. And I think that's because, the difficulty for us is that from me and my wife, is that we've had kids a little bit later. So therefore, that's, of course, a huge, you can't really discredit how much of an impact that has been. Of course, I'm now getting used to kids associations and clubs and things like this, and being the taxi driver, etc. So
yes
those kind of things are quite impactful to one's life. And we moved out of London, right? So there is a logical reason why there might be some disconnect, but really most of it is going to be around the opportunities. The feeling in our school is one of excitement. There's people are brilliant at communicating with the students. We don't actually like to call them students. We call them our friends, and they come in and they sit down. They always come in early, and there's always an aperitif on the go. There's lots of conversation. There's the 2 rooms going, so there's always 2 tutors and a helper, and there's often drinks afterwards. I know that happens very frequently. And there's just so much real great feeling around the kind of direction our school's going. And we did actually make another significant change as well, which is where we've been developing Wine with Jimmy, which is very much supplementary WSET help. But there are other things that are happening around that, but it's 90% of that so far. That's been developing very, very nicely. And that's our focus for that business. Of course, it's now our biggest business. West London Wine School is distancing itself from WSET a little bit more, because we do have a big competitor in London called WSET. So they're in East London, and they have just piled a lot of money into their school. It's a very difficult scenario where we are a partner on one hand, we're also a competitor on the other. So it's a bit of a challenging area. So they've ramped up their WSET. We still offer it, but we're we're being a bit more strategic about the amount of courses we deliver. And that change in our philosophy has been to, yes, keep creating WSET courses, but to actually now focus on the alternative education that you can get in wine. Like I mentioned earlier with Grandes Pagos de España, it may be the Rioja diploma that we've just launched. There are other courses that we're running too. And those, Wine Scholar Guild, etc., they have been really fascinating, not just for me, because it gives me new, exciting content to build and to deliver, but for my team. You know, they're not just standing up, delivering wine education of introductory classes or WSET. They have absolutely every possible path to go through that progression and deliver the other courses. So I mentioned my second in command went to California. We are the sole providers of their capstone course in the UK, and he's now on that path to deliver that, you know, and he's so excited about it, which is great. So yes, there's a shift in the business sort of direction as well. But that really is complementary to what I mentioned earlier about.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a tremendous amount of energy at this phase, and that's why I was curious if you were to poll everybody and say, well, what is the construct of, what is the DNA, the identity of our organization, and you know, what are those what I'll say core values that guide you through that next phase, and I can hear a shift in your development as it relates to the school and how, or the businesses, and what does that mean to your next phase of growth. That's super interesting. I can't thank you for sharing that.
If you've got a group of them together, the first thing, which is fundamental for us, is wine. So there'll be a lot of wine. And then I think the answers might be a bit more freer after all that wine. So.
Well, you know, it's interesting because there's a lot of things that I've jotted down here, and maybe you know, in a week or so, I'll share them with you, just so you know, just give a little time between and see what you think about those things.
Yep.
But I'm curious, and I have a funny feeling we could talk for multiple hours on some of these things, and I don't want to take a lot of your time. You've been very generous. But one of the things I'm interested in is, as you reflect on your journey, have there been certain heroes or inspirations that have guided you on this journey, or that you go back to for inspiration on your journey?
It's a difficult one. I don't know. Like, there's definitely been inspiration. I mean, there is a hero. You know, It's quite cliche, but my father is definitely. He's no longer with us, but he's definitely somebody who has been a huge.
That's not cliche. That's not cliche.
Okay.
It's authentic. It's authentic,
cool.
and it's may So it's not cliche.
Okay.
May resonate with a lot of people do it, but it's not cliche, in my opinion.
Okay, cool. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, he sadly passed away when he was in his 60s, and his ethic for his work rate, he was not working in any kind of high-flying job. I remember I mentioned to you that I come from a working class background. He was a painter and decorator, and my mother was a cleaner. So they would together to support their family, and they decided to have 4 boys. Well, I mean, decision's not there, but they decided to have 4 kids. It happens to be 4 boys.
Oh, your poor mother, as they say.
She loved it. So, you know, they had to support us on a working class wage, right? So my father would work 60-hour weeks. Now, in my life, I have said that I don't want that for my children, and of course, I've adapted my career in order to make sure that doesn't happen. But that's not what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is really how focused and driven he was to get his goal, which was to really provide for his family, which is always, I think, not consciously, I think, but you know, subconsciously behind me, it's always there driving me about what I do. And I am, you could speak to someone like one of my team at the wine bar, or you could even the school, or even my wife, you could say, talk to them about something around this. If there's a downturn in takings, right? If the sales drop off and people are saying, oh, it's the weather, or it's this, or it's this, and there's an excuse out there, I will always be the first to go, I'm not taking that excuse. We can adapt. And that's what happened in COVID, right? A lot of
You
people
have
took the money off.
adapted.
Yeah, many people took the money off the government and rested up for a bit. That's not me. So we adapted our businesses, but it was difficult in the short term, but the long term is we've got this wonderful online business for our wine school now, which is thriving, and we now manage it in a very good way. In the old days during COVID, of course, there was lots of problems around it because we're buying off the shelf products, to try and get these wines out to people and so on and so on. But now it's much more streamlined. And then Wine with Jimmy was born out of that, out of really the want of this ambition and drive that I have. I think that's behind me. There's many other factors as well, yes, but I think that, and certainly my mother as well, I can't leave her out of this. I know my dad was in a much more traditional family. He was the one working exceptional hours. My mother was working part-time hours, but of course, being a parent now, that's another job that she was doing, looking after four boys, and making sure that we were going to football practice and all those kind of things, and making sure we're fed, and whilst we're wrecking the house and whatnot. But that driving force, I think there's a lot of dedication and hard work there, which really drove me. And there are lots of other little bits of inspiration as well. But I think for me, that's my focus in terms of a person or people. And there's inspiration. Actually, I mentioned one earlier. I got inspiration of that friendship through a really good friend of mine who was able to support me in those he believed in me. So that, I think, I can't really put, I can't put a price on that really, because it was so important for me. Because when somebody says, look, here's some money, I believe in you, at that age, then I think that was huge inspiration for me as well. So really, I would never tell it to his face, but potentially he's a hero of mine. He knows who he is.
We'll edit that piece out. We'll edit that piece out so he doesn't.
If he's listening to this, he knows who he is, and he's going to call me up and he's going to be like, I know I'm going to get a message, and it's going to say, "Oh, it's your hero calling" or something like that.
Well, if he listens to it, it will be the one listener that we have, so that's a good thing. I'm curious, and I'm struggling with a way to ask this, but what is on the other side of the ambition?
In what sense?
What does it look like when there's this ambition that happens in you, but right. what is it at the end? Like, what does it look like to say you've achieved? What is the end result of the ambition? And I don't think it's an actual thing. That's what I'm curious about, because it's come up quite a bit.
Yeah. I don't know off the top of my head. I mean, the other side of the ambition in terms of what happens when I'm not, just driving towards these goals and developing my businesses, would be that I am, and this is not, I know your answer, but this was the first thing that popped into my mind, is that I actually do have the ability to switch off, and I love my family time. It's very important to me. I don't tend to work weekends unless there is, a trip that I'm on, or we're launching a new product. But otherwise, there is a side to me that needs to disappear, needs to understand that I do need to have time off, because sometimes I do have a PA, and she tells me constantly, well, actually, she told me off because I was going to rearrange a football match that I'm taking my boy to go on a wine trip, and she just was like, "Well, Jimmy," and I was like, "Good point." And she didn't need to say anything, and I just went, "Good point. I shouldn't do that." And I'm definitely coming under the realization that there are moments in time. And I put ambition and work really up there, right? Because when you get to like what you're gunning for with this answer, is when I get to that ambition, I suppose it's when you get there's that recognition that a product is doing well, it's getting rolled out to people are enjoying it, and you get the feedback. And the feedback you mentioned to me, Thomas, as well, in the green room at the start of this, that you spent something like 100 hours with me, and I'm getting feedback like this from people around the world, not just English speaking. There are people all around the world that they go running with me, they're on public transport with me, they go to bed with me. I get actually feedback from the spouse or the loved one or whatever it may be saying, Jimmy, you've done such wonders for my partner, but thank God I don't have to fight in the bedroom with you anymore, and things like that.
You're
So
cheating on me with Jimmy. Who's Jimmy?
yes, exactly. Oh, not this British guy again. God.
Yeah. Well, my wife, my child. So we just went on we were driving the other day, and we were listening to. I made her listen to the podcast because I'm going through classes now, and then she just turns to me at the end over it. She's like, "Well, when are you going to have a class or a glass, or go visit Jimmy?" You have that famous tag at the end. When are you going to have a class or go for a class, a glass with Jimmy? I'm like, all right, I get it. So yeah, I'm sure you hear that a lot.
But I think that's I do love getting that feedback. I think it's just fantastic, and it makes me feel that something I've worked really hard towards, people are using it. It's in their own words, that it's changing their lives. They are able to approach something they thought they'd never be able to approach before, take an examination. Many people taking it later in life and worrying about that kind of cognitive way of dealing with it, and I get it. And that's great, and I on all these trips I go on and wine fairs that I'm going to, supplier tastings, people come up to me. I'm very British about it. I find it unusual because I'm learning to like it a lot more, I think. But I find it unusual because in my mind, initially, I'm like, well, I put out a product which is really great, and you buy the product. So it's for me,
Non-transaction.
yeah, it's a transaction. There's a commercial nature to this. It's a commodity, but I don't think it actually is that. And people find that they are gaining better understanding about themselves, and they're going on this journey, but they have somebody to sort of guide them through it. Maybe they're not understanding at the institution they're at, and they find it really, really useful. And that's been really great. We get a lot of great feedback, which makes me realize, of course, with the wine school and the wine bar, we get those as well, certainly with my team members too. And I think that's great. We really champion when we get some great feedback about a tutor or one of my team at the bar, then there's a bottle of wine waiting for them. There's lots of shouting about it, and that's great. So I think that's that recognition is certainly there, but not just for me, but people are really enjoying it, I think. And yeah, it's helping people.
You're fostering community, and you're furthering people's ambitions and goals. So that's pretty incredible. Not many people in the world can say they do that, and they do it well. If people were listening to this, other than your one friend who's going to call you and mock you for calling, and mock you a bit, what would be one or two key takeaways that you would want somebody listening to this to take away, whether whatever that may be?
Key takeaways. So I think first and foremost, we went through a discussion in the early stages about an hour ago now. I'm sorry about that. I can talk a lot.
No worries.
We went through the discussion about how I came into this industry. And I think that is mightily important. There are so many people out there. There are parents out there. Please let your children follow their hearts and their dreams. I think we all have grand aspirations for not just our children, but maybe our colleagues, our friends, or whatever it may be. We have some expectations, and I think I went through those struggles of an expectation, and I didn't want to do it, and I ended up doing this, and this is where I've got to in my life. And I think there is that ability to be flexible, and I know that may seem a little bit more like a modern contemporary cliche to say that, sort of in comparison to the old days when we were funneled into this certain job roles, etc. But that would certainly be something for those people out there that are bringing children into this life, for sure. I would also, I don't know, in terms of people listening to this, it comes back to some of the keywords I mentioned. Communication is very, very important. I think actually accessibility, making sure that whatever you're doing in the world of work, that it's difficult because, of course, I'm hugely generalizing, but making it accessible in my line of things when we're communicating a product, to make it accessible, but to communicate that well and think about your communication as well. So I've hugely adapted how I communicate. And you've only got to watch, Thomas, you've probably done this, watch one of my early videos to a video that I show these days. And there's a difference in style. You know, I very rarely in my videos will and ah anymore. And I've adapted my style to pause more, and I slow down, so much so, in fact, that English speaking people often speed me up to 1.5. I don't know if you've done that. But it's about, you know, in terms of communication, there's a lot to be said about pauses and, you know, reading the room and reading your audience, understanding the audience. And with me traveling around, being in markets like Georgia or like America or South Africa, I've listened to people about how to adapt my presentation skills, my communication skills, and that is, I think, which is in my own mind taken me up to this next level in terms of that. And I don't know. I don't know what else. Maybe.
What would you think the 18-year-old Jimmy would have said when, you know, he was nervous about talking about wine in the restaurant? If that Jimmy took a look at your videos now, what do you think 18-year-old Jimmy would say?
Yeah, it's a really good way of thinking about it, Thomas. Yeah, I think they would definitely. I think you would. Yeah, it's a challenging one again. I think it's about giving somebody, linking into what I first said, giving somebody some content that they're happy with, following their dream and promoting that, right? So if you have a child who is more fascinated in geology, I mean, I really hope that's one of my kids. And one of the there's a hope, there's an expectation. But you know, and it's about seeing that light up in their eyes. And I think my parents were so hardworking that they kind of missed that with me, that I was very much more about not an engineer's mind, not a scientific mind, but much more of a geological mind. And yes, there's of course crossovers and so on, but I think that links into that, you know, giving them the possibility and the angle to actually present and be comfortable presenting, because that's what scared me in the early days, that I was given a topic about, I don't know, quantum physics, and I wouldn't be able to talk about it. So.
Well, listen, this has been amazing. If somebody wanted to find out more about Wines with Jimmy or some of your other businesses, or get some more information about education and the things that you're doing, what would be the best way that they can reach out or get some more information?
Yeah, thank you. The best ways to get in touch certainly are by Wine with Jimmy. So that is available on all good social media platforms these days, but YouTube is the main one. Of course, you can get in touch via Instagram as well, in email. So you can get in touch with my team, who would pass any kind of connection like they did with you, Thomas, with info@winewithjimmy.com. So they're the best angles. If you're UK based, of course, there's West London Wine School, so you can visit that online and book in person or online. And if you're in the US, of course, do look out for me. I will be teaching in Boston quite frequently, at least 2 or 3 times a year going forward. I'll be at the Boston Wine Expo, which is an annual thing. So that's quite good to look out for. And if you're Canada based as well, I am at the Chardonnay Cool Climate Conference every July. So I can meet you there. And it's always nice to meet as well. So please do get in touch. You know my phrase, you know.
So is my daughter.
And I do go to a lot. I was in Virginia in December, and I put out a post and I say, look, I'm going out, and I met up with one of the Wine with Jimmy followers that came down from DC, you know, and that will frequently happen. I actually have a tasting group in Connecticut from one of my early posts I put out, and we meet up every time I'm there. So, you know, I'm a very open person, as you know, fairly sort of heart on my sleeve character as well. So if you do see me traveling around, then please do come and say hello, get in touch to meet up. There's always a possibility.
Jimmy, I can't thank you enough for the time and the authenticity and the vulnerability. It really means a lot to me. And
Pleasure.
we didn't even get to talk about Jeff. So maybe another time we will have to talk about Jeff, because I
Yeah,
really was curious about that as well. But again, thank you very much for the time. I really appreciate it.
my pleasure.